Tammy Jo Blanton, 46 years old, Indiana woman brutally murdered and cannibalized by her ex-boyfriend. Romantic love affair turns sour. The killer uses a jigsaw to cut open her torso. He then rips out her heart and eats it. The community is shocked and horrified. Tammy Jo Blanton, a 46-year-old woman, was found deceased on September 11th, 2014. At the time, she was living in Clark County, Indiana. After she'd failed to show up to work that morning, her co-workers called police and asked them to do a welfare check. Tammy was killed by her ex-boyfriend, Joseph Oberhansley. After killing Tammy, Joseph cut out her heart with a jigsaw and ate it. In 1998, Joseph shot and killed Sabrina Elder, his girlfriend. Sabrina had just recently given birth to a baby boy, but Joseph insisted that the baby wasn't his. He accused her of cheating on him. Sabrina said that the baby was definitely his. She hadn't cheated. But Joseph would not listen to reason. He pulled out a gun and threatened Sabrina. Joseph's mother, Brenda Self, happened to be there when this was happening. She tried to protect Sabrina. She actually dove in front of Sabrina to try and protect her. But Joseph was undeterred. He shot Brenda and then chased after Sabrina. After shooting Sabrina, Joseph turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. However, Joseph and Brenda both survived. Sabrina did not survive. For shooting Sabrina and shooting his mother, Joseph was charged with murder and attempted murder. However, he must have had a damn good lawyer, because somehow the judge was convinced to accept a plea deal for manslaughter. His defense attorney, Ron Yengich, argued that Joseph had been high on meth at the time of the shooting. He also said that Joseph had started doing meth to cope with the pain of losing his father and brother, both of whom died the previous year. Sabrina's father was unhappy about Joseph being allowed to plead guilty to manslaughter. He said that in his opinion, it had been premeditated murder, not manslaughter. For manslaughter, Joseph received an indeterminate sentence of 1 to 15 years. He was eligible for parole after serving 1 year, although the Utah Parole Board forced him to serve out almost the entire 15 years before releasing him. Ultimately, Joseph's grandparents were the ones who took possession of the baby after Sabrina's death. They ended up changing the baby's name, however, as it had originally been named Joseph after its father. They felt that an infant should not be named after a person who'd killed its mother. After being released in 2012, Joseph Oberhansley moved to Indiana to live with his mother, the same mother he'd nearly killed. She'd since forgiven him, and she even testified at his parole hearing, saying that he was a changed man and he was ready to be released. What she didn't know was that when Joseph shot himself in 1998, he destroyed his frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the part of the brain which tells you not to murder people. Very bad things can happen when it gets damaged. Like whenever you get mad at somebody and think, I'm going to kill that person, it is your frontal lobe which steps up and says, nope, not today. During a parole hearing in 2004, Joseph was asked by the parole board about the head injury he'd received. He told the parole board that he felt the injury had made him mentally slower, but also calmer. It's made me to a degree, I feel, a bit slower mentally, Joseph said. I feel that it's really calmed me down, made me a lot mellower. Joseph moved to Indiana from Utah after being released from prison in 2012. In Indiana, he became romantically involved with a 46-year-old woman named Tammy Jo Blanton. When Tammy and Joseph met, they apparently hit it off very well. From the pictures at least, they looked very happy together. And by all accounts, she was over the moon for him. However, a few weeks into the romance, Joseph began to show his true nature. The shift occurred soon after they'd been together for about 4 weeks. This shift in behavior was extremely sudden and pronounced, like Mr. Hyde turning into the evil Dr. Jekyll. Tammy started telling her friends that Joseph was becoming extremely violent. She was terrified of him. Tammy wasn't willing to tolerate the abuse for long. She tried to break up with him. She told Joseph that he had to move out. He wasn't allowed to live in her house anymore. Joseph didn't take the news well. He decided that if he couldn't have Tammy, then he'd force her to be with him. On Monday, September 8, Tammy arrived at work in the morning. She told her co-workers that she'd been held prisoner in her own home all weekend. Joseph had kept her tied up and sexually assaulted her multiple times. On Monday morning, she was able to convince him to let her go to work by saying that people would be suspicious if she didn't show up. She told her coworkers that she'd been sexually assaulted all weekend, and she was terrified of going home. Tammy ended up staying at a friend's house, Donna Victoria, for the next few nights in order to avoid Joseph. She wasn't willing to risk returning home with Joseph there. While she was at Victoria's house, Tammy texted Joseph to let him know that the relationship was permanently over. "Just wanted you to know I won't be home," Blanton texted. "No one, and I mean no one, gets to terrify me like you did on Sunday. I will never forget it as long as I live." Joseph responded by attempting to apologize for what happened over the weekend. "Baby, we had a great dinner Saturday. Don't let the negative enter your mind," Joseph texted. "You are my soulmate. Come to me, Pilas. Come home, talk to me, baby." Blanton was not persuaded. She told Joseph that if he didn't leave, she'd press charges against him for kidnapping and rape. "You can choose to be in denial about what happened Saturday into Sunday." "I won't be in denial," Blanton replied. On September 10, Tammy moved back into her house. She brought her father and at least one other male friend along when she first moved back in, just in case Joseph was still there. While her dad was there, he changed the locks on all her doors to make sure Joseph couldn't easily get back in. On September 10, Tammy sent out a series of text messages to her friends. "At the end of the day, I'm taking my life back," Blanton texted. "I worked too hard to get here. No one will take me down." That would be Tammy's final message to the world. Blanton fully expected that Joseph would try to break in that night, so she actually barricaded her doors with furniture. That was smart, but unfortunately, it would not be enough. Around 3:30 a.m. on September 11, Joseph attempted to enter Blanton's home. When he discovered that the locks were changed, he tried kicking down her back door. Tammy's barricade held well enough, and she had enough time to call 911 before he could get in. Police arrived and ordered Joseph to leave, circling back a few minutes later to confirm that he'd really left. Joseph then went to his mother's house. He woke her up in the middle of the night and launched into an unhinged tirade against Tammy. He said she'd changed the locks on him. He was absolutely furious. He then stormed out of his mother's room, determined to have his revenge. At some point on the morning of September 11, Joseph returned to Tammy's house. This time, he was able to break down the back door and force his way through the barricade. Tammy Jo Blanton ran into her bathroom and locked the door. This would be where she'd make her final stand. And so Tammy Jo Blanton died alone in her bathroom, fighting for her life against a man who she'd once loved. Police officers arrived at Tammy's house around 10 a.m. on September 11th. When they arrived, they noted that her car was still in her driveway. They knocked on the front door, only to be greeted by a man who introduced himself as Joe. He said that he was Tammy's boyfriend. The cops asked him for identification, and he said he didn't have any. They asked him if he knew where Tammy Jo Blanton was. Joe said she was missing, and he couldn't find her. At this point, the officers noted that Joe's hands were injured and bloody. They searched Joe and found a folding knife in his pocket. When the knife was unfolded, they found it was covered in blood and hair. A female police officer then entered the house while the others were dealing with Joseph outside. She found an absolute bloodbath inside. Everything inside was covered in blood, more blood than you can possibly imagine. The walls, the floors, and furniture were all covered in a disturbing amount of blood. She must have figured out quickly that this was the scene of a murder, but she kept moving through the house until she found Tammy. Tammy Jo Blanton was found inside her bathroom shower. The bathroom door was busted as though somebody had broken through the door. She'd been stabbed 25 times. She was eviscerated. Her head was sliced open with a jigsaw. Brain tissue was spread throughout the bathtub. Perhaps most disturbingly, her torso had been sawed open. Her entire heart was missing from her body, along with parts of other organs. In Tammy's kitchen, they found evidence of cannibalism. Pieces of Tammy had been cooked in the oven, then consumed. Joe ate Tammy's entire heart after cooking it. Joseph had once stolen Tammy's heart figuratively. Now he'd done so literally. To me, that's right up there with Israel sewing Samantha Koenig's dead eyes open. Very soon after Tammy's mutilated corpse was discovered, Joseph Oberhansley was charged with burglary, rape, and murder. However, Joseph denied killing Tammy. He told police that Tammy Jo Blanton was actually killed by two black males who'd broken into her home. When Joseph was arrested, his court-assigned lawyers really wanted to use the insanity defense. Because really, what else could you possibly argue other than insanity in a situation like this? But Joseph thought he knew better. Against the advice of his attorneys, he withdrew his initial plea of insanity. His defense would now be forced to argue that Tammy Jo Blanton really had been killed by two black males. The trial of Joseph Oberhansley began on September 12, 2020. It is very telling that both the defense and the prosecution felt the need to begin their opening statements by warning the jury that they were going to see and hear some extremely disturbing things. The prosecution warned the jury that they were going to see pictures 100 times worse than any horror movie. The defense actually went even further, telling the jury that they were going to see pictures that would leave them traumatized for life. During the trial, Joseph took to the stand in his own defense. Joseph told the jury that he never broke into Tammy's house. She'd let him in voluntarily because she wanted to reconcile. Then while Joseph and Tammy were having reconciliation sex, two black men suddenly broke into Tammy's house. One of the black men was armed with a gun, the other was armed with a knife. According to Joseph, the intruders knocked him unconscious by hitting him in the head. When he woke up, he found the house in total disarray. He was confused and disoriented from his head injury. Then the police showed up and blamed him for everything. Again, this is all Joseph's version of events. It seems unlikely that any black males were actually involved in Tammy's death. During cross-examination, a prosecutor asked, "They had a knife and a gun, and they just knocked you in the back of the head like a Hardy Boys novel?" The defense actually did a pretty good job, since Joseph was ultimately acquitted of the rape charge. He was, however, found guilty on the charges of burglary and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. However, he continued to protest his innocence. "I am 100% not guilty of these false charges against me. I am disappointed in the decision," Oberhansley said. "I did not kill Tammy Blanton. It was two black guys."